Zombies are one of the most prominent kinds of monsters in movies and games. It's hard to think of a type of monster that has been more overdone. The living dead, the walking dead, the hordes of the dead, they're coming for us. The characters fight their way from one shelter to another. They're running low on food now, and they're running low on ammo, and now the characters are arguing in some abandoned building. Their infighting is just as big a threat to their own survival as the zombies themselves. Here they come, to grab you up, to eat your flesh, to eat your brains. You just might get turned into one of them yourself. The zombie apocalypse is underway. But how did zombies develop into these tropes? And what are zombies exactly? Well, things were not always like this. Zombies have quite a bit of history that spans across different cultures and historical periods. The concept of the zombie traces back to several sources, including folklore and religious beliefs. One of the earliest origins of zombie mythos can be found in voodoo traditions from West and Central Africa, as well as Haiti. In these belief systems, there's a concept of reanimation, where a person's body could be controlled by a sorcerer or other spiritual practitioner after death. This was not exactly the same as the modern undead zombie, but it laid the groundwork for the idea of people being brought back to life under some sort of supernatural control. The term zombie itself made its first appearance in the English language in 1819, within the pages of a historical work on Brazil, penned by the poet Robert Southey. Initially, the spelling was rendered as Z-O-M-B-I. The origins of this word, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, can be traced to Central African languages, drawing parallels with Congo terms like Nzambi, meaning God, and Zumbi and Nzumbi, referring to a fetish, as in some kind of magical trinket or amulet. Some scholars also draw connections with the Congo term Vumbi or Mvumbi, meaning ghost, revenant, or a corpse retaining its soul, as well as Nvumbi, denoting a body without a soul. In a Kimbundu to Portuguese dictionary from 1903, the related word Nzumbi is defined as soul, while a later Kimbundu Portuguese dictionary characterizes this word as a spirit believed to roam the earth, tormenting the living. Introducing the Western world to the notion of the voodoo zombie was the book The Magic Island from 1929, authored by W.B. Seabrook. This work narrates the encounters of its protagonist with voodoo cults in Haiti and the reanimated thralls that they control. So this original concept of the zombie from African and Caribbean lore is a recently deceased person turned into essentially a mindless slave through magical means. It is not flesh-eating, it does not have the gory, rotting appearance, and it cannot turn people into more zombies with its bite. We can see this kind of voodoo zombie in lots of old movies. Just look at some of these titles from the 1930s and 40s. White Zombie, Wonga, King of the Zombies, I Walked with a Zombie, and Revenge of the Zombies. Throughout this transition from the original voodoo zombie into the modern day zombie, science comes into play. One could argue that Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein from 1818 provides a sort of proto-science fiction zombie. A mad scientist reanimates a corpse, technically an amalgam of corpses, but instead of it doing his bidding, it breaks loose and wreaks havoc. Following that same vein is the short story Herbert West, Reanimator, penned by H.P. Lovecraft in 1921 and 1922, which depicts a scientist obsessed with reanimating corpses and the horrific results of his experiments. Then we have the novella I Am Legend by Richard Matheson from 1954, which has a post-apocalyptic premise after a virus has turned the entire population into nocturnal things similar to zombies or perhaps vampires. A lone scientist and final survivor of the pandemic fights against the bloodthirsty undead people, while at the same time contends with his terrible isolation. It is worth noting that in these seminal works of sci-fi horror, the reanimated people are never referred to as zombies. Clearly, they were not thought of as zombies by the readers or the authors, at least not in the traditional sense of the word. This sets us up for the arrival of the modern zombie. In 1966, the British movie The Plague of the Zombies was released by Hammer Films. In this, zombies are rotting, grotesque things instead of just entranced-looking people. They kill people in all sorts of ways, though they're not cannibalistic. They don't bite, they don't turn people into more zombies. In fact, the plague that is turning people into zombies is actually being caused by a man who learned voodoo magic, and he wants to dominate the area and get rich off of zombie slaves working a mine. So technically these are still the classic voodoo zombies, but they introduce the look of the modern zombie. Then, in 1968, American director George Romero unleashes Night of the Living Dead, and the modern zombie is officially born. The bodies of the recently dead reanimate and prowl about, killing and eating people. Their victims soon rise as more undead, creating a growing threat. It's not magic nor mad scientists that create the zombies this time, but rather a space probe is coming back from Venus, and it brings with it some kind of mysterious radiation. But wait a moment, are these actually zombies? The word zombie is never used in the movie. The characters usually just call them those things, but we also hear them officially referred to as ghouls by the news broadcasts. You've probably heard that word before. But what is a ghoul? A ghoul is a cemetery-dwelling, flesh-devouring undead. The ghoul has its own far-stretching history. It actually goes all the way back to early Arabian lore, and likely even earlier because it probably evolves from the word Galu from ancient Akkadian myth, which were considered demons of the underworld. The concept of the ghoul spread throughout various cultures, even making its way into European literature in the early 1700s when 1001 Arabian Nights got translated into French. The ghoul does not necessarily have a single defined form. In general, they are thought of as monstrous humanoids, maybe something like a zombie, or maybe something a bit more fantastical, but they are associated with graveyards and crypts, and they eat corpses. And of course, they will kill people for more flesh to eat. So, Night of the Living Dead depicts something like zombies, though arguably they are more like ghouls. The movie even begins with a scene in a cemetery. However, the movie fans, for whatever reason, came to call them zombies. The sequels, Dawn of the Dead in 1978 and Day of the Dead in 1985, continue the story, with the levels of gore becoming increasingly extreme, and they develop the idea that the undead are taking over the world in an apocalyptic sense. Dawn represents a struggle between the living and the dead, whereas in Day, the dead vastly outnumber the living, and those who are still alive are holding out in defensible locations, while at the same time fighting amongst themselves, even to the point of murdering each other. Another important zombie movie worth mentioning is Return of the Living Dead from 1985. This movie had a pop appeal and it was commercially successful. Watching it now, it's very 80s in its style, and at moments it's more like a comedy movie. It introduced the concept that zombies want to eat brains. Combine this with the 1983 music video for Michael Jackson's smash hit Thriller, and the zombies' ascent to cultural archetype was set. Keep in mind that it was the fans, the collective pop culture, that kept referring to these reanimated ghoul-like people as zombies. This term was not promoted by the authors and the filmmakers who popularized this kind of monster. Again and again, zombies showed up in various forms of media. Steam built over time, leading to some very successful properties. The 2000s and 2010s had some major commercial successes, things like World War Z, Zombieland, 28 Days Later, and the remake of Dawn of the Dead. This is in addition to the popular TV series The Walking Dead, which has nothing to do with the 1936 Boris Karloff film The Walking Dead. These and countless other movies depicted zombies in more or less the same way: reanimated or perhaps infected people that are driven to kill, to eat, and to turn the living into more zombies. From cinematic blockbusters all the way down to scrape the maggot-infested bottom of the barrel schlock, you'd be hard-pressed to even find how many zombie movies have been produced. Some estimates are as many as 8,000, but who really knows? In the 1990s, Resident Evil and House of the Dead were mega hits for zombie video games. They went on to spawn slews of sequels and to inspire numerous other zombie video games. Some are survival horror games, some are shooters, some are action, some are tower defense. Some non-horror game franchises have even jumped onto the zombie bandwagon for a grab at that sweet, sweet cash, including titles such as Red Dead Redemption, Call of Duty, and even Big Buck Hunter. I'ma hunt me some zombie deer, I'll tell you what. Again, the modern zombie trope plays out over and over in these games. The zombies want to kill you, eat you, and or turn you into another zombie. Speaking of games, we can't leave out tabletop role-playing games, or, as I like to call them, role-playing games. Because unlike a video game RPG where you are limited by what was programmed into the game, an RPG at the table, composed of real people, imagination, and guidebooks, actually allows you to play the role of a character and to have unlimited creative potential. Dungeons & Dragons was the first role-playing game. It was published initially in 1974. It's had several different editions over the years, and from the beginning, it has distinguished between zombie and ghoul. Zombies are created by necromantic magic and are similar to the traditional voodoo zombies. They are undead, they do have rotting bodies, or at least kind of moldering bodies, but they're essentially mindless drones that carry out their master's bidding. If left uncontrolled, they do shamble about and will usually attack anyone they see, but they don't bite, they don't eat people, they don't turn anyone into other zombies. The ghouls, on the other hand, are the flesh-eating undead people, and depending upon the edition, they might turn their victims into more ghouls. There are also wights in D&D, that's W-I-G-H-T, which wights are undead persons that drain the life energy from living people, and then their victims rise as zombies. D&D technically evolved from war games, particularly chainmail, so that legacy goes back to before the modern zombie trope got popularized through films, and before movie fans dubbed what are essentially ghouls as zombies, and D&D continues that tradition through to today. Of course, there are many tabletop RPGs other than D&D, and zombies are a staple undead monster that you will often find. Some follow in the classic tradition of zombies as distinct from ghouls, but some do follow the tropes of the modern zombie. Speaking of RPGs, I am deep into the development of a 5th edition compatible book called Monstrous Heroes, which is going to feature 17 monster classes that you can play as characters in your campaigns. It balances classic and modern elements to bring in-depth options all the way from 1st through 20th level for each class, complete with subclasses and a bunch of new spells. There are actually 2 undead classes in the book, the Vampire and the Revenant. This is along with other things like Dragon, Minotaur, Elementals, Fae, and a ton more. Plus, there will be character backgrounds, feats, new magic items, and a section for game masters that includes plots and guidance about running partially monstrous or all monstrous adventuring parties. Check out the links down in the video description to pre-order Monstrous Heroes, and you can also download a free sample PDF. It has plenty of content for you to start playing these savage characters right away. Two other wildly successful properties that feature undead are The Lord of the Rings and the book series A Song of Ice and Fire, with its associated TV show Game of Thrones. In A Song of Ice and Fire, there are mysterious beings called the Others, aka the White Walkers, which are sort of ice demons, and they have the supernatural ability to reanimate dead people, which then serve as mindless soldiers and thralls. These reanimated people are referred to as wights, the same W-I-G-H-T word that I referred to from D&D. They're not called zombies, they're not called ghouls. Characters often just refer to them as the dead, but never is the term zombie used. Interestingly, this word wight comes from Middle English, and it actually meant living person. Yet, with life comes death, and J.R.R. Tolkien, in his studies of mythology and linguistics, along with his own creative twists, used the word wight to create the Barrow-wights in The Lord of the Rings. These are undead tomb guardians, and they're based heavily off of Draugr or Vetter from Norse myth. The chapter Fog on the Barrow Downs was not featured in the film Fellowship of the Ring, but in the book, Frodo and company are paralyzed by the wights' magic and nearly slain by them on a sacrificial altar. So we can see how the modern zombie concept is a result of the blending of different influences and creative interpretations of writers, filmmakers, and artists over time. All of this still leaves me with one big question. Why are we so fascinated with zombies? Why did they even become so popular to begin with? Well, looking into it, it seems that there are a number of reasons why. And really that should not come as any surprise, because whenever something becomes a major cultural force, it always combines many different elements. It's always a confluence of multiple factors, which creates a kind of root system that then grows into a monumental tree in the grove of culture. Here are some reasons why zombies capture our attention so much. Fear of the unknown and fear of death. Zombies are horrific dead things, and looking upon them literally causes us to face our fear of death. They also challenge our understanding of mortality and confront us with the idea that we might be controlled after death, whether by magic or some kind of dark form of science. As much as we are repelled by things that scare us, we are also fascinated by them. There's a reason why horror is even a genre at all. We get a thrill from being scared, especially when we know that in the end, we'll be okay. It's just a movie, it's just a game. Survival instincts. The survival instinct is deeply ingrained in us humans. Zombie stories tap into this instinct, making us imagine how we would respond and adapt in the face of this kind of apocalyptic scenario. I don't know about you, but my friends and I have talked about what we would do in the event of a zombie onslaught lots of times, and the fascination with survival tactics obviously is much broader than just zombies. You could replace zombies with dangerous animals, violent criminals, an invading army, and so on. Social commentary. Zombie narratives often serve as allegories for societal issues. Zombies can reflect our fears and anxieties about diseases and spreading pandemics. They can symbolize technology taking us over until we become mere drones. They can represent conformity and how there are many trends in which masses of people just go along with certain ideas, even to the point of hysteria. Someone who does not have much individuality and doesn't think for themselves could be described as a zombie. As we saw as early as 1978's Dawn of the Dead, zombies can also symbolize mass consumerism, in which endless hordes of people hungrily consume products and entertainment, even to the point that they start losing touch with their humanity. Catharsis and empowerment. Watching characters fight against zombies allows us to experience a sense of victory, whether this is literal in terms of survivors overcoming the overwhelming odds, or more figuratively in which the characters are not overtaken by conformity and mass hysteria. This can be both thrilling and cathartic. Morality and ethics. Zombie stories raise ethical dilemmas, such as questions about what it means to be human, or the moral choices that survivors must make, and the consequences of those choices. In zombie movies and shows, the characters almost always face these kinds of dilemmas at some point. This is often what leads the characters to fight amongst themselves and maybe even end up killing each other. What should we do? And what are we willing to sacrifice to do it? Humans have a diverse array of temperaments and goals, and those personality conflicts can lead to extreme measures in crisis situations. Variability and creativity. The concept of zombies is really quite flexible and adaptable. It allows for a wide range of creative interpretations, from slow, shambling zombies to fast runners, from virus-driven outbreaks to supernatural reanimations. The diversity keeps the concept fresh, and if you look especially into games, there really is no end to the kinds of variants and different remixes of zombies. There might be a zombie that spits harmful liquids, or a zombie infused with icy powers, or a zombified kind of beast or giant. Our fascination with zombies is a complex interplay of our fears, our desires, psychological components, and the opportunities for storytelling. Their popularity endures because they touch on universal themes while allowing for creative exploration of the various aspects of the human experience. You combine all this with the feeling of community that the fandom brings, and it actually does make quite a bit of sense that zombies became so popular. Even if they have been overdone to some extent, I wouldn't want them to go away. They fill a fantastic role in media and games, and I do suspect that they will hang around for quite some time anyhow. This is Esper, wishing you all the best with avoiding being bitten by zombies, ghouls, and whatever other foul things go bump in the night. And as always, may your adventures be many.